begin what has grown to be an important press conference to an incredibly consequential press conference because of things that go on in Albany in the dead of the night. So as recently as probably 2 weeks ago, we had decided, working with the legislative leaders and Congressman Lawler, that we wanted to talk about waste and mismanagement in Albany. And we've been moving along in that direction, and it was my intent, and it's still my intent, to mention the billions of dollars of Medicaid fraud in this state that goes unchecked. It's still my intent to mention the staircase down the block that goes from $15 or $16 million to something like $70 or $80 million to repair because of neglect. It was my intent to talk about the unemployment insurance scam going back to COVID, where the state of New York borrows billions of dollars, doesn't pay it back, but now they're confronted with President Trump. It was my thought to talk about taxes, fees, congestion pricing, and all the waste and mismanagement that goes along in a state capital that is totally controlled by the Democratic Party. But guess what happens? Due to your efforts, on Friday, we hear about one of the most cynical attempts imaginable by the government of the state of New York to potentially change the election law in New York State to slow up the representation in the North Country for a Republican who will get elected to a congressional seat. So 780,000 people, it will take longer for them to be represented in a government that congressman would be in the majority and can do all sorts of things for New York State. Great message from the governor. And then there is what the Daily News mentioned today, and what I will say to you, a lot of us, and I live in Brooklyn, are thinking that the backside of this is the 22nd Senatorial District in Kings County, where the current senator is likely to get elected to the city council, causing a special that would take place in an extraordinarily strong Republican state Senate district that President Trump probably won 2.5 to 1 at the beginning of June. But the process of what the Democratic Party is to affect the outcome of that election. These are New York State government officials being paid with taxpayer monies. This is not a political party concept. This is a crude attempt to hurt the taxpayers of New York State for political gain, nothing more than political gain. Now, I've got others here who have got a lot more to say about this than me, and what I would like to do is start off with the Republican leader of the state Senate, Senator Robert Ortt.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Kassar. Thank you for having this press conference. And I want to thank all of you for being here. The Conservative Party Political Action Committee conference yesterday and today. It's always great to be here with like-minded New Yorkers. It's great to be joined by my colleague who you're going to hear from next, Assembly Republican Leader Will Barkley, of course, Congressman Mike Lawler, and several party chairmen from around the state and like-minded folks. You know, as I was listening to the chairman rattle through all of the waste, fraud, and abuse, the truth is we don't have enough time. You all don't have enough time, and I certainly don't have enough time to go through it all here with you. He mentioned a lot of it. He didn't mention the billions of dollars. I don't think. Maybe you did, and I just missed it because there was so many things. But he didn't mention the billions of dollars that have been spent on illegal immigrants in this state for the last several years and running. Right now, that meter is still going due to the sanctuary policies in New York City and New York State. He talked about the Medicaid waste, fraud, and abuse that happens at an unparalleled scale, even by comparison to other states that also spend billions and billions of dollars on that program. He talked about, obviously, the staircase. He talked about the MTA. Even after even after instituting the congestion pricing scheme, which I was told, and you were told, this is how we're going to fund the MTA. Now we're told the MTA still needs more money. Because of course the MTA needs more money. I've been here for 10 years and the MTA always needs more money. We could give the whole FIPPin budget to the MTA and next year they would need more money. That's just the reality. It's the most poorly managed, poorly run transit system in the country. It should be the best, and it's probably the worst, but it's the most expensive. So it's the opposite of what you as a consumer would want. You're going to pay the most and get the worst service. If that was a public or a private entity, they'd be out of business. But the chairman talked about this bill, and I got to tell you, I was almost surprised, but not totally surprised when I read the story on Friday, because this is just the latest in a long, brazen attempt the last several years. So I'll go back to the redistricting fiasco. Now, you all remember the redistricting because many of you covered it ad nauseum. And I talked about it along with Leader Barkley, and I know Congressman Lawler certainly was involved. Former Congressman Mark Molinaro was definitely involved. If I never go through a redistricting period again, it'll be too soon for me. But they didn't get the map that they wanted. They drew a map that was ruled unconstitutional gerrymander. So what do? They change the court. They force out one of the chief judges that was part of the 4-3 opinion against their map. And then they block another judge who they didn't deem was on the program to get the most liberal court they could get. And not surprisingly, when that case came back up before the new court, it passed. So they got at least a map that they were satisfied with. And they corrupted and manipulated the highest court to do so. That's the part that I want to be taken today. This was not some, sort of back room. These are state Supreme Court judges, one of whom wasn't even there when the case was heard, even though she said, we talked about it during her confirmation hearing. So that's one. Then they go through this local elections bill. Now you say, well, what is that? Well, because they don't like how some of the local elections are turning out. They don't like that they're getting their ass kicked in Nassau County. They don't like that they're getting their ass kicked in Suffolk County. They don't like that they're losing seats in the city council in New York City, that President Trump is doing better. They don't like that they lost their supermajority in the Senate. So what do? Well, we're going to change the local elections so that county executives and county legislatures will be up in the same year that the president is national elections, which Democrats turn out, we know, better in those elections. Not that they couldn't turn out in the even years. It's not like democracy is inaccessible. They just don't turn out in those years. So they want to manipulate when elections are held, the dates of local elections. Now, they always say this, it's under the guise of saving money. And I just think it's ironic because they are so full of it. For all the reasons I just mentioned, the Democrats that serve in the state Senate and the state Assembly do not care about saving money. They never have. The only time they care is when it's a convenient talking point to cover for some craven, brazen political move like this. That's it. That's it. Or if they want to cut funding from police officers. But then they really care about saving money. But so then now we have the last thing that comes out the other day where they're going to manipulate and change. Now, don't forget, we changed this law a couple years ago because Governor Cuomo left a seat vacant for almost a year. He left 600, 700,000 people without a Congress member for almost a year. And my colleagues and some on the left, and really everybody said, well, that's not great. So we're going to change it to make it quick, as fast as possible, so that a special election has to be called once there's a vacancy. But now we find out that isn't really good enough. That isn't good enough. And we're gonna manipulate it even further. This is the party that says they care about democracy and they care about, they're gonna say, well, don't you care about people voting? Listen, people can vote and people are gonna vote. We've had many special elections under the current rule. Whether Democrats or Republicans won, The goal is to trigger the representative process as quickly as possible to get someone in that position to represent those folks as quickly as possible. Not when it's convenient for the ruling one-party Democrat majorities here in Albany or across New York State. And I think this is the part that really just aggravates, they say, well, this is about saving money, and they say, it's about democracy, and all of that is they're just so full of it. I can't believe they could look at any of you in the media with a straight face and say that. This has nothing to do. Today, there was a Siena poll that came out that showed 57%, 56% of New Yorkers would like to see someone else in the governor's office. Bad news if you're the governor. Good news if you're the people in this room, and I think for a lot of New Yorkers, but it tells you that people are upset with what they see going on in New York State. And if you think this instills confidence in them, if you think this changes their mind about what's going on, if you think they're sitting there at home going, you know what, I really wish they would just move these elections to the primary, that's the biggest problem facing New York. Instead of changing their policies, they're going to change the rules of how we vote. That's always their playbook. Instead of changing the policies they put forward to meet the needs of New Yorkers, they'd rather change the dates of election. They'd rather change who's on the court. They'd rather change when we vote, how we vote, to get the result that they want to protect their political power. They don't care about protecting New Yorkers, that's evident. They care about protecting their own political power, and they're not even pretending. They're not even being cute about it. They're doing it openly for the whole world to see. I will promise you this, I will not just sit idly by and talk about this. Everything is on the table to try and prevent this from happening. Everything. I am not going to sit here and just accept this for what it is. This is disgusting. This is wrong. We're going to say so. I don't care, anybody has a camera, a microphone, I will say that as loudly as I can, and we will pursue every other option to try to prevent the Democrats from rigging, corruptly manipulating the elections in this state so that they can try and protect their power base. That is just unacceptable. I don't care, even if you are a Democrat, you can be the most left-wing loon as far as I'm concerned, and you could still agree that this is not how it is supposed to work as an elected representative government. So with that, I want to turn it over, again, I want to thank the chairman and all my colleagues who are here today. I want to turn it over to my good friend, someone who I know shares my frustration, my passion on this issue, as well as a lot of others, and that is Assembly Republican Leader Will Barkley.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you, Chairman Kassar, for putting this event together today. Rob and I were talking this weekend, and the sad part about this whole thing is this is nothing new. We see this year after year after year, just what Rob said. They change the rules to get the outcomes that they want. I think they made one mistake on this one, though. They announced it on Friday. If they announced it today, they probably could have gotten it through, and none of us would have been able to catch up with it. The fact that they did it on Friday, you conservatives, the Republicans, party leaders, we recognize the problem. So finally, and I emphasize with the media too, I appreciate the stories that have been written on this. I hope you continue to write about the unfairness of it. Maybe they're feeling a little pressure on that. And I'll join with my friend and colleague Rob Orr and say in the Senate Republican Conference, we'll do everything we can to make sure that this unfair law becomes law. I also want to recognize being here with my former colleagues and great friends, Mark Molinaro and Mike Lawler. Thank you for having me here today. I thought we were here, although we can talk about this election bill, I thought we were here to talk about government waste and spending, which I want to just focus my comments on, and they do match a little bit what Chairman Kassar said. In New York, New Yorkers are concerned, the three biggest topics New Yorkers are concerned about. I think I say this at every press conference, but it bears repeating because apparently the Democrats aren't getting that message. They want New York affordable, they want safe streets, and they want a solution to the migrant crisis. So what has the Democrats' one-party rule in Albany given us over the last decade? We see it. It's culminated in this governor's budget that's $252 billion. Just to put that in perspective, on a per capita basis, that's approximately $13,000 worth of spending for every citizen in New York State. $13,000. Since the governor became lieutenant governor in 2015, spending has increased by $100 billion. $100 billion. We're not even close for fiscal responsibility compared to any other state in the nation. Not even close. We're blowing the doors out. And the biggest things we spend money on in New York, healthcare and education. And I'd submit to you, our returns on that investment aren't all that great. Other states are spending a lot less and somehow doing much better in those regards. But it's not just those big programs where we see some waste. And Leader Ort and Chairman Kassar mentioned a few of them. I just want to say, do you remember the $15 million we did to build a film hub that we sold for $1? Anyone remember that?
Good deal.
Great deal. How about and Leader Ort mentioned this, how about the $637 million that we spent on COVID tests to a company that apparently was friends with the governor, 2 times higher than what other states were paying for COVID tests, 2 times higher. I'm happy we brought up the staircase, $80 million to fix the staircase outside the Capitol. You know, if we had the $1 million staircase that they were building now, it would be the $1 billion staircase in New York. And then last but not least, this was my favorite, you might have missed it, it was in the Times Union, $4 million to restore an Erie Canal barge that they sold at auction for $5,000. Anytime you have a budget that's $252 billion, you're unfortunately going to see waste. There's just so much money out there, you're going to see waste. So that's why our conference has called over and over again for audits. Let's audit some of these programs. Let's audit the COVID spending. Let's audit the economic development programs. Let's audit the MTA. And why don't we audit the migrants crisis and how we're spending money on that? Our calls for that have always been answered in the negative. No way. The Democrats don't want accountability, they don't want audits, and they certainly don't want affordability. In fact, everything they do is the antithesis of those 3 A's. So thank you very much, Chairman Kassar, to have me here. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you all later tonight, I think. Thank you. Am I introducing you? I'm on a bit of a streak here with Mike Lawler. This is the second press conference I've had the honor to do with the congressman. He's doing a terrific job for the Hudson Valley and being a very strong voice in Washington for all of New York. Mike, thanks for the service you're doing. I'll do a press conference with you every day of the week if you want. Thanks. Congressman Lawler.
Thank you, Leader Barkley and Leader Ort and Chairman Kassar for being here and your remarks. And we're also joined by Senator Steck and Assemblyman Slater, so I want to thank them for being here as well. Look, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is New York. And it is sad, but true. Kathy Hochul is the most feckless, inept governor in the country. There's a reason her dismal approval ratings are where they are. There is a reason why 57% of New Yorkers prefer someone else to lead the state, because they know it, and even she knows it. She is the accidental governor who is in completely over her head. Since she took statewide office, state spending is up $100 billion. Since she took the governorship, up $61 billion, and she is proposing to increase it by $10 billion. There is no level of control or oversight or common sense that is being applied anywhere in this state government except by the leaders standing right next to me. They are consistently pushing back. And for whatever anybody says about Washington and some of the dysfunction that goes on down there, at least there's transparency. These people haven't held a hearing, let alone oversight of the executive, in God knows how long. The MTA is the worst run authority in America. It carries more debt than 80% of the states in the country, and these folks haven't been bothered to even have a hearing and say, how the hell are you spending the money? The waste, fraud, abuse, mismanagement, and corruption, because that's really what it is. New Yorkers are paying a corruption tax for the inept management of its state by Kathy Hochul, Carl Hastie, and Andrea Stewart Cousins. The level of incompetence is grossly negligent at best, if not outright criminal. And I'm sorry, when you look at what they have tried to do with elections in this state, it is to seize complete control of state government, the voters be damned. When you corruptly try to gerrymander the districts, only to have a Democrat-appointed Court of Appeals throw it out because it violated the state constitution, and try to do it again by corrupting the court. The New York State Court of Appeals was one of the most prestigious courts in America. It has been corrupted to its core. It is shameful what they have done. When they try to move election law cases only to be heard in 4 counties, because God forbid a judge that is not a left-wing nut voice an opinion on election law cases, when they try to move elections to a certain date because they think it will benefit them, I got news for you. It's not going to benefit them. We had massive turnout in my district, and I kicked their ass despite them spending over $20 million to try and defeat me. Why? Because voters have had it. They understand this state is corrupt to its core. So you look at the spending, you look at the mismanagement, Medicaid. We spend more on Medicaid by 50% more than the average of the other 49 states. The most expansive Medicaid program in the country. We are spending billions of taxpayer dollars on free housing, clothing, food, education, and health care for illegal immigrants. Meanwhile, this feckless governor is charging the average commuter $2,500 annually just for the privilege of driving to work to pay taxes to fund this corrupt government. It is pathetic. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. And it's not only about Republicans and conservatives pushing back. The media needs to push back. Democrats of good conscience need to push back and say, what the hell is going on here? Kathy Hochul's calling the president begging, please don't kill congestion pricing. You mean to tell me when you're proposing to increase state spending by $10 billion that you can't find $1 billion for your MTA capital program? I mean, let's be serious here. $252 billion and you can't find $1 billion. You need to scam hardworking New Yorkers out of more money and fleece them and then pee on their leg and tell them it's raining? I saved you, a lot of money. We brought it down. Give me a break. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. And it's time for New Yorkers to fight back, to push back against the insanity. And no matter how much the Democrats try to corrupt the system, no matter how much these folks who tell us that they want to protect and preserve democracy, in fact, want to undermine it at every turn so they can keep power. There is no reason for this piece of legislation to come to the floor for a vote. Not one. Let's see if they even have the audacity to have a hearing on it, or a discussion, or an amendment to the bill. It's 150 members of the Assembly, 63 members of the Senate. My Democratic colleagues that are in the majority need to grow a spine and push back against the absurdity of their leadership trying to seize control from the people. Let the voters decide who they want to represent them. You know what? If the voters in Brooklyn want a Republican conservative senator to represent their views, good for them. That's their right. Don't try to take it away by jamming through a special election on the same day as the New York City mayoral primary, which is such a debacle because of their gross incompetence in New York City. They need to show leadership. Don't hide in your office and let the party leaders vote for you on the floor. Show up on the floor and do your damn job. This is not hard, folks. I've sat in that chamber on the assembly floor. I've sat in the chamber down in Washington. You are elected to represent your constituents, not your party. You are elected to stand up and use your voice and call out the corruption wherever it occurs. Because this is corrupt, and I will tell you, I am going to be requesting that the Department of Justice open up a RICO investigation into New York State. Because this is as corrupt a scam as we have seen. Every election law change they have made is not designed to support the people. It's not designed to increase voter participation. It is not designed to allow for a free and fair election. No, it is designed entirely to silence the voice of the minority, period. That is what they are doing, and it needs to stop. And with that,
well, let's a couple of ground rules here. First of all, I just want to make it clear that any litigation that should occur, the Conservative Party will be joining in on. We have spent a lot of time litigating in New York, and we do think in this case there's a lot of precedent on the federal court system looking at congressional special elections. And one of the elections that was being referred to is when Grimm left and Donovan ran. Cuomo attempted to spend the year not calling the election, and he lost in court. The legislation that straightened this all out was a result of the court ruling. Anything that involves Congress could very likely end up in a federal court. So let's just keep that clear, and we're willing to litigate no matter what. Simple rule, after you mention the question, tell us who it's directed at. That's it. Yes.
Congressman Lawler and then also Congressman Orr, your reaction to the 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. Obviously, there's a lot of cross-border economic activity in New York and Canada.
yeah. So obviously, Western New York and the North Country are heavily reliant on trade and economic activity with Canada. And that's understood, and obviously a prolonged trade war certainly is not to anyone's economic benefit. But as we saw this morning, Mexico blinked. Why? Because Mexico and Canada are wholly reliant on the United States economy. 60% of Canada's trade is with the United States. 40% of their GDP is because of the United States. President Trump is effectively using tariffs as a negotiating tool to force both Canada and Mexico to act on issues of paramount national security importance to the United States, including cracking down on illegal immigration, stopping the flow of those on the terror watch list, and stopping the flow of illicit drugs, including fentanyl, into the United States. And the fact is that you saw Mexico, after saying, we're going to put retaliatory tariffs on the U.S., and after Chuck Schumer looked like a putz holding an avocado and a Corona bottle, blinked very quickly. Okay? So the Democrats' positioning on tariffs is completely off. And what they don't understand is tariffs are a tool, and an effective one, when you actually have somebody who's willing to stand up for the United States and the American worker. And so that is what we are seeing down in Washington. I suspect Canada will follow very quickly. You saw the CEO of the second largest Canadian company, Shopify, basically blast Trudeau for allowing this to proceed forward, and recognizing that it will have devastating impacts on the Canadian economy. It is paramount, obviously, that we bring down costs. Here in the U.S., we're blessed to have a lot of choices. So if you don't want to buy Corona, You can buy an American-made beer and it'll be just fine.
Thanks, Congressman. And Jimmy, I appreciate it. I don't know if it's a promotion, but I appreciate the Congressman Ord. It's actually Senator Ord, as you know. Yeah, I don't know if I want to be there. But, you know, look to me, this is, on the Canadian side, as someone who represents a district with 3 border crossings, as the Congressman pointed out, a prolonged trade war with Canada certainly carries with it some negative ramifications for my constituents, for my community. However, I think this was very avoidable. This is all about Justin Trudeau trying to look like a tough guy on his way out the door. That's all this is. If you had a different prime minister, a better prime minister, a more rational prime minister, someone who didn't look at his politics as, I got to be 180 away from Donald Trump, I think you wouldn't have this, at least to the degree that you do. I suspect when there is a new prime minister, if not before, you will have a deal with Canada very quickly. Because as the Congressman said, and we've had this conversation here in Albany, I've had it with the Consulate General, we've had it with members of the Canadian government for a long time about the immigration issue. We're seeing increased crossings at the northern border significantly from years past. And part of that is because the human smugglers and human traffickers have gotten wise that it's actually in some ways easier to purchase a plane ticket and fly him to Canada and then bring him across the northern border where there are less resources, obviously, when it comes to border patrol and border enforcement, to the extent that you want to say under the Biden years there was any border enforcement. But to the extent that there was, it certainly wasn't being directed at the northern border. So that is where I think this stems from. And I think when you have a new prime minister, you'll have a deal with Canada. I hope that happens sooner than later, not only for my district, but I would say for the entire northern border. Canada is our largest trading partner, and that should continue. But again, I think, as the Congressman said, this is a negotiating position, and they need to know, just like Panama needs to know, that we are serious. This is not just rhetoric. This is real, backed by a leader, a commander-in-chief who is intent on using every tool possible to help the American worker, to help the American economy, and to strengthen our border and our position around the globe. And whatever pain there may be early on, I think will be worth it in the end when we have better trade deals, better economic policy, and we're respected again after President Trump is done in the 4 years in the White House.
America First, what's your question? Who's it directed at?
For the congressman and the leaders, if they want to chime in. Over the weekend, former Mayor Mike Bloomberg had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on education. In there, he said the voters, quote, "The voters see Democrats capitulating to the teachers' unions, lowering standards, tolerating failure, and blocking charters. The more we should use our votes and pocketbooks to replace them." For the congressman, what do Republicans need to be doing on education, and is it time for Republican members of the legislature to not accept NYSED endorsements?
So I'll leave that to the legislative leaders. But look,
well, you haven't accepted a NYSED endorsement, so
they've never endorsed me, but that's neither here nor there. I have a very good relationship with the teachers because most all of them are very hardworking. They care about the students. And they try to do their jobs day in, day out. Look, this is, I read Mayor Bloomberg's op-ed, and he was 1,000% correct. Education spending in New York has gone up significantly, along with healthcare. It is the biggest driver of cost in the state budget, and yet scores have gone down. It has been a real crisis point. I think the mayor is absolutely correct in what he laid out and what needs to be done. We need an all-of-the-above approach to education, inclusive of charter schools, inclusive of private schools and religious schools, and vocational schools. We need a K-12 system that is not just putting kids on the career path to college, but on an actual career path. And that includes vocational education. Those jobs can't be outsourced. How many more philosophy majors do we really need? The reality is we need people who can work with their hands, who can build things, who can help grow the economy. We have a housing shortage in this country. We're 6.5 million units underbuilt. We need construction workers. We need to actually have an education system that is focused on what the economic needs are of the country, what the workforce needs are of the country. You know, if we're going to be bringing Micron here and looking to have chips and manufacturing come back to the U.S. and New York, we need to be having an education system that is helping educate children to fill those jobs. So the mayor is spot on. Democrats have capitulated for years on this issue. They think just throwing more money at it solves the problem rather than actually having a rigorous education system and having standards, not dumbing them down. We need to be teaching our children at a very young age, and it starts with allowing children the ability to go on a path that suits their skills, their talents, their interests. We don't need kids failing in school because they're not interested in something. Meanwhile, if you put them on a different path, they would actually thrive. That's what our focus should be. So there is a lot of work to do on education here in New York, and certainly from the standpoint of the union or anybody else, my perspective is everybody should be working together to address the problems and the challenges, and those that don't want to work towards putting the children first, well, then they need to move out of the way.
Can Republicans effectively rein in that waste, fraud, and abuse at SED while carrying the NICE endorsement now?
Well, if you have a governor, you can. I mean, the reality is we have, again, one of the most feckless, inept governors in the country right now, leading our state. She's proposing just increasing state spending. She just gave her SED commissioner a massive pay raise. Sure, I know. The governor knows nothing. She's got nothing to do with anything. I mean, let's be honest here. The fact is, you know, you spend more time focused on that than actually looking at results and how we fix state education. So if you actually had a governor that knew what the hell they were doing and willing to hold people accountable, then yes, you can fix it.
Thanks. I agree very strongly with much that Congressman Lawler said. I will note a couple things. First of all, in New York State, we spend about $29,000 per student to educate them in New York. Somewhere along the line, we got to see what we get for that money, union or not union. I think it's a reasonable question for all New Yorkers to ask. Are we getting our return on $29,000 per student? A lot of people would say no. You know, I think it's a mixed bag out there. I've been proud to have the nicest endorsement every race I've run, but that doesn't mean I don't say what I want to say and what needs to be said when it's appropriate. For instance, last week, NYSA did a press conference that they wanted to raise taxes in New York. I don't know what that has to do in education. We have, I think, an $8 billion surplus this year that the governor is quickly spending, by the way. The idea that somehow we need to raise revenues, raise taxes further on New Yorkers. They invited me to the press conference. I politely declined. I'll gladly speak out publicly that I don't think that's the right direction. But I think they've endorsed me, and I would encourage any of our members who, you know, want their endorsement, that's fine to do it, because ultimately, I think our conference and our members believe in educating our children. We believe in that, and if they support us doing that, we'd love to have their support. Where we differ, we're certainly going to voice our difference of opinion.
Thanks. We're going to do one more question.
Yeah, I'll just be real quick. So first of all, I don't chase endorsements. The only endorsement I chase is that of my constituents. People that I wouldn't accept their endorsement, they don't endorse me anyway, so it's an easy thing for me. Sometimes I've had their endorsement, sometimes I haven't. But I think it's everything. I want to echo everything that was said, but I also want to say there are a lot of folks who support charter, who give and support Democrats. And that's got to shift too. If you can't say you care about school choice and then support the conference that is wholly owned by the opponents of school choice. You just can't have it both ways. That'd be like someone who says, I really care about public safety, and they're backing Alvin Bragg. Like, it just doesn't add up, right? It just doesn't line up. Something has to change there. So I would also say to those folks, for someone out there whether you're a wealthy person or not. If you care about school choice, then you need to support the only conference in this state that gives you a chance at school choice, and that's our conference.
Can I ask you one Congressman Lawler, just in terms of the special election legislation that's been talked about, understanding all the issues about representation for people in the North Country, what does it do to the House Republicans' ability to govern with a relatively narrow majority if you're down one seat and you have a vacancy like that, for a couple extra weeks or months?
Yeah. Look, given the margins we're talking about, it really makes very little difference whether it's a 1 seat or 2 seat or 3 seat. Everybody's got to work together. And obviously, the biggest thing before us is reconciliation and getting that legislation passed. Obviously, we have 2 vacancies right now. This would be a third. The 2 in Florida are going to be filled April 1st. So, the sooner these seats are filled, the better. And they're all going to be held by Republicans, which is precisely why Democrats would even consider this, because they want to extend the time period by which we don't have a representative in that district. But that's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. Regardless of who the people elect, they have a right to be represented. And once Congresswoman Stefanik is confirmed, she is going to do a phenomenal job at the United Nations representing the United States. But within an expeditious time period of within 90 days, the people of the North Country have a right to have a representative. And whether it's because of that or because of the state Senate seat in Brooklyn, whatever the Democrats' ridiculous reasoning behind this is, it's wrong. And it's laughable for them to say it's about expenditures and saving money. So at the end of the day, to me, it's not going to have that big of an impact in terms of how we function as a conference. We already have a small majority. So we're all going to have to work together. That's just a reality. All right?
Mayor Adams, there's no more questions. We're late for a lunch.
Thank you, everyone.
We got to do it.